on, but
Yeah,
it's,
I got it now.
the timer's on. All right.
Yeah, I got the red light. Okay, thank you, Pat.
So, so what I was saying is that, so bikes, we don't want people riding bikes to the cemetery. That's really clear. But could there be some sort of walkway that connects the cemetery to the bike path? I'm saying that in terms of, I see people walking loops all the time, and, I'm just thinking of, I'm just thinking it from like making it a walkable city, and it's municipal property, and I'm just thinking down the road, is there some way we can make that happen? I mean, people walk through School Street Cemetery all the time, and how could we make that happen at the cemetery as well?
I mean, I think it says right in the bylaws that bicycles aren't allowed in the cemetery. Roller skates, skateboards, all of that.
Yep. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying from a walking standpoint. And we don't have to answer this question today. What I'm suggesting is that I see people walking all the time, and it's nice to have loops, and there's not a lot of access on that side. So people are always going to find a way to cut through. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that you can control it, right? Can we control it if we provide a better way to access it?
So, I mean, I don't think there'd really be an issue if the bicyclist would stay on the roadways and make their way to the rail trail, which they easily could do if they went down by our dumping area. One of the issues that we saw is when you look at the Valley Cemetery where the actual maintenance building is, they're using that hillside kind of as a jump, and they're eroding that as they're riding down that embankment, and then they're just cutting right through the grave. So, I mean, if they can stay on the roadway, I don't see an issue with it. But how do you control that? I mean, we can't have a staff member there at all times to say, you need to stay on the roadway.
Totally. Totally. Go ahead, Paula.
Sorry. Well, first of all, Dave has his hand up. So before I talk.
Sorry, I'm looking at the agenda. Go ahead,
okay.
David. Thank you, Paula.
Yep.
I understand there is an entrance from Renahan Meadows to come up through their parking lot and get back on Mascoma Street.
You're right, David, there is. But I would actually say that, that's actually, Renahan is private property. So they could, there is a little walkway that comes down. But I'm just wondering, at some point, Renahan Meadows might just say, this is private property. So I'm just looking at, and I've used that as well.
See, that's where I grew up, down that area.
Uh-huh.
And we still own property there. And I think some of it will be taken care of once the bridge is put back together.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
Because now they've got a new sidewalk and everything there that goes right, and it's going to eventually go over the bridge. And I think we're going to see a lot of this problem taken care of.
Yeah, I think part of it, though, is that right across the street from that cemetery is basically a mountain biking park. So
yes.
And so, right behind Upper Valley Jewish Cemetery, right, is an access point for the Boston Lot mountain biking trails.
Right.
So I think that when the bridge is put back together, I think that'll help, because I do feel like a lot of this is because the bridge is out. But I don't think it's going to go away either, is what I'm saying.
But I don't think it will be an issue once the bridge is put back together.
So
maybe a suggestion is to just keep it on the radar for now, and as that bridge opens up, take that fencing down and see if we see the activity increase again. And if it doesn't, leave the fencing down. If it does, readdress it at that point.
Right. So that fencing that is right down, I mean, so is there an issue because the fencing that you put up or DPW put up that's all the way down at that path? Is that an issue? Because did you put a fence that's not even on city property, right? So maybe we could check that.
I would assume that it's all, is the Greenway, Paula, city property?
Well, yeah, it's all under our jurisdiction. It's physically owned by the state of New Hampshire Department of Transportation, but under our lease agreement, we maintain all of the property that's associated with the Greenway. So we have rights to put up things like a little fence.
Okay.
But beyond that issue, if the Valley Cemetery is going to be used as an actual access point to the Greenway, then it needs to be an established access point that
Correct.
Then the city is going to be actually maintaining.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's a discussion that the board wants to have, then that needs to involve somebody from the recreation department along with city administration to see if that's going to be something that is desired and how that is going to come about. Because then we should have wayfinding signage so that people know that, there is going to be an access point. This is how you get there. So you don't just be disrespectful and ride over somebody's grave and cause damage.
Yeah. It's basically trying to take control of the situation, right? And
right.
Yeah.
So if we want to put that, I say we, but if you all want to put that on as a future agenda item, then somebody can add that at the end of the meeting when we talk about future agenda items, or you can do it right now if you decide everybody wants to make that a future agenda item.
I mean, I'd like to see it as a future agenda item.
Yep. So.
Shall we make a motion?
You don't need to really make a motion when you get to that point of the agenda. You can just add it, or you can just say that, you can all just say you want to add it. That's fine.
Okay. Fran, did you have a comment?
Yes, the only problem is down where that fence is, where they come off of the trail. You have to walk across people's graves.
Yep. Right. And I think what I was trying to say is that could we establish some other place where it could come up from the path to the cemetery that wouldn't impact graves? And I think that's what Patrick was alluding to as well. Is that right, Patrick? I don't know.
Pat, you're muted.
Sorry, can you just rephrase that, Sue? I didn't quite understand the question.
Oh, so Fran was saying that they're coming up and trampling on the graves. And I think that I was trying to say, and I thought you were on the same page, was that it's establishing possibly establishing a path that would not go through those grave areas.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a matter of trying to contain them, but how do you contain? I think you put it pretty clearly in the email that you had sent in response to me that the bicyclist people are pretty hard-willed. They're going to find a will. If there's a will, there's a way. So are they going to follow the rules? Are they going to follow the roadways, or are they just going to continue to use the jumps because they are mountain biking and trying to use the obstacles throughout the cemetery? Or do we just do a reach out to the bicycle community and say, hey, we're giving you access. If it comes to that, we're giving you access. These are the rules and regulations that you need to abide by. Otherwise, we're pulling it, and you're riding across deeded pieces of property. It's no different than riding across, my front lawn or your front lawn, really.
Right. So, and I'll just add that. So there are 2 bike shops in Lebanon. There's Mason Racing right near Central Supply. And then there's Omar and Bob's on the mall. And I know they rent bikes and they send people right out of the shop. And because that bridge is out, I don't know this. I'm guessing, they're probably going down the path, right? And then they're just cutting up somewhere. So I think that's part of it. So again, hopefully the bridge being put back together would address it. But also I think, talking with those bike shops and also possibly talking with the Upper Valley Mountain Biking Club about that as well, are two things that might help the situation too. You know, maybe they have a newsletter, they could put something in their newsletter or something of that sort. And I think, Patrick, you suggested talking to the rec department as well.
I did.
Oh, I thought Patrick had suggested that in an email exchange I had with him earlier on this, but
yeah.
Yeah.
He and I are on the same page, so.
Okay, great. David, did you have a comment?
Dave, your hand's still up. Wait.
Oh, and now it's gone. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, all right. Is there anything else you want to add to this topic, Patrick, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next item under new business is the grave curbing at West Lebanon Cemetery. So Fran actually brought this to my attention. I don't know, I go through the cemetery, but I guess I'm not looking for stuff. And Fran shared the photo that you see in your packet about some of the curbing that's going on. And unless they have some sort of long-term care agreement, they should not be doing this kind of curbing. So this seems like this falls pretty squarely within the DPW Sexton purview. Patrick, or I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm not sure what the board can do. It seems as though this would have to be addressed. This would have to be addressed by the city, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is clearly, in violation of the existing code. So I think what needs to happen is a letter needs to be written from Pat on behalf of the Board of Trustees to the owners of these graves that the curbing is prohibited in accordance with the code. And if they decide that they want to retain the curbing, then they need to request an exception from the Board of Cemetery Trustees. And then we would put them on a future agenda item or a future agenda for review.
Fran, have those been there for years, or are those kind of new?
Those are all new. 13 of them that I counted.
Is that right? Are they all in West Leb?
Yes. Yes. And I think that the thing is they can have them, but they have to sign a contract that they're going to take care of them themselves. Isn't that?
They have to have a long-term agreement. And
yes.
Yeah, we've only ever done one of those. So we only have one example that I'm aware of that we could utilize. But they actually have to come and seek permission from you as the Board of Cemetery Trustees, whereas before it was by approval of the city manager.
Okay.
I think Paul is spot on that. Maybe we should try and reach out if we can even contact the families. I mean, if we don't have contact, obviously we can find the deed. If the deceased people are there and it's relatives that aren't in the area, it might be difficult to reach out to them, but at least put that effort forward and tell them that this is the process that they need to follow, and somehow put a disclosure in there. If they don't continue to maintain it, then we can pull it. I mean, there's going to come a point in time. It's just like School Street Cemetery. I mean, you have people buried from the late 1800s in there. You're eventually going to get to a point where you have relatives that aren't maintaining those graves, and you still have that curbing. Right now, some of that curbing, like the photo that's included in the packet, that really doesn't look that bad. And truthfully, it kind of makes it easy for us to maintain it because we're not weed whacking in between stones. We can run the mower right up against that curb that they have, that red brick. So getting them to follow the proper procedure for it, and do the paperwork for it, as well as giving us the permission, if in 30 years they determine that they're not going to maintain it or they can't maintain it, that we can at least remove it so that it doesn't become a maintenance hazard and we have weeds growing up around the stones that we can't maintain.
Now, I sent you pictures of all of them, right?
I think you sent me 3 pictures, Fran, and I think that 2 of them were in the packet from last month. And then I just actually, this is the only one I shared with Paula when we put the packet together for this month. So you should be able to look back and see the other ones.
I sent all of them to Patrick.
Okay, well,
I'd have to go back and look at all of them. There are some areas where people have planted shrubs and trees that have been dead, obviously, for years that we did cut down this last year. But I guess I'd have to go back and emails from you, Fran, to see if there's ones that are typically overgrown or are not being maintained.
I would guess that, I mean, just looking at this one picture that was in this packet, that the relatives are nearby. You know, this seems like we should be able to find the relatives on these graves pretty easily, but
yeah. So Pat, I think what you're just going to need to do is go through West Lebanon. If there are in fact 13 of these areas, you're going to have to go through West Lebanon and make your notes about what graves they are and try to figure out ownership and get a letter out to everybody. And because they do need to follow the proper process, or else this could get out of control really quickly.
Yep.
And this seems to be the only cemetery where it's happening.
That I've seen, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right.
I think it's notably more like the picture that's in your packet. That's section E. And if you look at it, there's 3 right in a row there. You have the double heart, as well as the standard monument. Then you have the double heart in the background of that one that has the curbing. And then if you actually go behind that, you have the Aaron stone, which actually has curbing around it, which is not being maintained anymore. That's one that we actually have had issues with before even I.
Doesn't that one have a long-term agreement, or they just got permission to do that? I can't remember.
No, I think that is the one that has a long-term agreement, but there's definitely a maintenance clause in that agreement. So we just have to go back and look at what that agreement was and see where we're at.
Okay. Fran, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Nope.
Okay.
That's basically it.
Okay, great. Thank you for bringing that to the attention of everyone. Okay, moving on to item D, which is the intent and mission of the bylaws for creating an inventory of all cemetery plots.
So we're on C.
Oh boy, that's okay. Stuff. Shoot, that's the big one. Okay. Almost skipped right over like the most important one we needed to talk about tonight. So item C represents, as you all remember, we made changes to the fees and we made some modifications to the chapter, and we went in front of City Council and shared these changes to the City Council, but we didn't get it to public hearing because of coronavirus, and also we needed to check a few things with Attorney Waugh on some of this. So Paula's actually, I think Paula, you've been really the one working with Attorney Waugh on this. So I'm going to let Paula talk to the new fund that was established.
That's to be established.
To be established once this chapter is approved. So, right. Okay.
So what you have before you tonight, first of all, when you're looking at the agenda format that Sue and I put together, if you have any comments, any recommendations, anything that you'd like to see, different, then just, please reach out to me, because this is just something that I put together to hopefully help you all in running through your agendas, and also provide the public with a little bit more information about what you all are doing as a group, how you're handling your business and that kind of stuff. So on the cover sheet of this packet, which is the page 14, you can see, line the agenda item, I gave a really brief summary of what this is, and then I'm proposing an action. That action is not set in stone. That action is just simply for your consideration and how you could basically wrap a bow around this item if you decide that this is the action that you want to take. So moving on from that point, as Sue said, this ordinance was originally presented to the council at the beginning of the year to make those amendments to Chapter 46 to remove the requirement for the Perpetual Care Trust Fund and establish the Cemetery Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund. What the city is proposing after further conversation with Attorney Waugh and amongst ourselves in administration and trying to figure out the best way to manage the overall maintenance of the cemeteries was to look at the possibility of creating two funds rather than one. So the Cemetery Maintenance and Preservation Fund would still be the same as what it was when we were originally talking about this earlier this year. The difference is that now that Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund would be funded through the interest from the existing Perpetual Care Trust Fund. So that money that used to be taken from the Perpetual Care, or the income from the Perpetual Care Trust Fund that was just basically offset the general fund, would now be all in the Cemetery Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund under the sole authority of you as the Board of Trustees. So that money varies every year. Sometimes it's been 17,000, sometimes it's been 27,000. It all depends on how much income that Perpetual Care Trust is making. The other part of funding for the this Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund is the $75 fee that is collected when we charge for setting of foundations. And that is on, let's see, page 19 of your packet in section B. So that $75 fee for future maintenance would also go into the Cemetery Maintenance Preservation Trust Fund. The new fee, the new fund that we would be looking to establish is the Cemetery Maintenance Special Revenue Fund. That fund would be through an appropriation by the council if they chose to make one, and also the half of the sale for lots that we were originally talking about going into the Maintenance and Preservation Fund would now go into the Maintenance Special Revenue Fund. And that money would be used to fund more of the, I guess I want to call it the long-term operational or sometimes capital needs for the cemeteries. And that money would be under the discretion of the city manager and the Department of Public Works and how that money gets spent. Burial fees would all go to the general fund because those are set to offset the current cost of burials. So that would go solely into the general fund. The only other changes that we're proposing are those that were already presented as part of what was done to the council back earlier this year.
So Paula, so the Cemetery Maintenance Special Revenue Fund, those funds would really be funds that the board could use on projects, but would there be times that I'm sure that the city could actually withhold those funds like they're doing now?
No.
Okay.
No, because that fund would be funded by the interest from the income off the Perpetual Care Trust Fund.
That's
and
right.
Yes, that's the money that would be deposited into the Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund for use by you.
And so as the two of us discussed this a little bit, but we don't know how much money, how much interest is incurred until the end of the year.
Correct.
So any planning that the board wants to do for a project, we don't actually have the exact number or the exact monetary amount that we have to spend. We just know that we're going to have a range of funds to spend because we
Correct.
won't know that number until the end of the year.
Correct.
So what happens if we don't spend that money in a year?
It stays in the fund.
So it'll just keep rolling over. We won't have any year-end issues or activities to do so that we can spend it. If we spend it, we spend it. If we don't, it'll be there as well.
Correct.
Okay.
Paula, does it stay in the fund for them to roll over to the next year, or does the interest, because it wasn't spent, does it go back into that account and then the interest increases because there's more money in that perpetual care fund?
No, it stays in the Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund.
Gotcha.
It's just like right now, if we were using the Perpetual Care Trust Fund, the income on that would continue to grow if we didn't siphon it to put it into the general fund to offset costs.
Right.
So this will function the same way. That money will stay in that trust fund unless and until the Board of Trustees requests, because what you're going to have to do is request that, that money that the trustees of trust funds moves the money from the Perpetual Care Trust Fund into the Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund. And once they do that, it's there.
But that would be basically, the board would say like, okay, we need $10,000 for this project. So that there would be some process for that request to be submitted to, that wouldn't actually go, would that go to the request from the Preservation Trust Fund, or would that go to the trustees of the trust funds request?
Nope. The only thing you're going to do annually is make a request to the trustees of the trust funds to move the income from the Perpetual Care Trust Fund into the Maintenance Preservation Trust Fund. And once that money is there, it's yours to do. It's yours to spend.
Okay. So it's a separate line item within that fund.
No, it's two separate funds.
It's two separate funds. Okay. Okay.
Does everybody understand what I'm talking about?
So Paula, when you just said, just to clarify, so when we make that annual request to have that interest transferred to the Cemetery Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund.
Yep.
We get to spend it. And then, okay, I'm sorry. So then that Cemetery Maintenance Special Revenue Fund, that was just like on some of the fees that you were talking about earlier. Is that right?
Right. So the Cemetery Maintenance Special Revenue Fund is going to be funded through the sale of lots.
That's right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So that's going to get split half and half. So half of the sale of lots will go into the Special Revenue Fund. Half is the general fund. And then that money could be, the Special Revenue Fund can also receive an appropriation. So if that were to happen as part of our budgeting, then we can fund that through that way. But that fund is under the purview of the administration. The Maintenance and Preservation Trust Fund is under the purview of the Board of Trustees.
Okay. I think it's great. Does anybody have any comments, or does anybody want to share anything?
And I just want to say also that these amendments got put in front of you all as part of this agenda last Thursday when I posted it. And so, if you are not comfortable in making this motion tonight because you want more time, to review and absorb, then please take your time and we can take this up again at the next meeting. I put this motion in here because this would be what I would ask the motion that you utilize to make it from you off to council when you're ready to make that motion. It does not have to be tonight. I just want to reiterate that. If anybody needs more time, to review and absorb, and you want to ask questions at a later date, you have that ability completely.
Do people want more time, David? Yes?
David, you're on mute.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, okay. One question. That money, would that be what we would use to repair cemetery funds? I mean, cemetery maintenance, or would there be a separate fund for that? Like last year, we were given $25,000 to repair school street stones and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes, this would be that money that you would use to do your monument maintenance. Yes.
it is okay. Thank you.
Right. So the maintenance of the cemetery themselves, that would not be this money. That would be totally separate, right, Paula?
Right, but you could use, if there was maintenance items that you wanted to do beyond monuments, and you voted to use some of this money to do a different maintenance item, then that would be up to you. But it's primarily for your monument maintenance. Or if you wanted to build some kind of an improvement in the cemetery, like you wanted to fund a fountain, or you wanted to build a walkway, or, do some kind of a beautification, then this would be the money that you would utilize based on recommendations you're making to do that improvement in that cemetery.
That's what this new fund would allow us to do.
Correct.
So
Okay,
the city, so for clarification, the city would not be like last year, we'd set aside in the budget $25,000 for monumentation. We would not be going to the city for that out of DPW's maintenance operational budget. That would have to come from the maintenance and preservation budget.
Correct.
David, do you have a question?
Your hand's still up, Dave.
Nope, and it's gone. For the infant. Oh, Fran, go ahead.
Fran.
This was pretty well discussed, wasn't it, before when we went through all of this? So I don't think I need more time to think about it. I don't know about the rest of you.
Yeah, so the changes are the establishment of this new fund. So all the other wording, that we had put together earlier in the year is the same. The changes you're seeing before you are to clarify the differences between the funds.
I understand that the $25,000 was a startup fee, right, Paula?
Well, yeah, basically that was right. That was a way to kind of kick things off, and
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but like these funds would be used for the baby grave monumentation that we want to do, right?
Correct.
So it's where I know that the fund, that startup, or the fixing of the monumentation, which is what a lot of the work has been focused on thus far. But it's really what the board decides what we want to do with that money in terms of the cemeteries.
Yep.
Okay. And then I did have one question on, I kept reading it back and forth, but Paula, maybe you could explain it. So it should be on page 20. It's item B, and that's one big sentence there, but about halfway down, it says total income or principal from the fund may be expended by the Board of Cemetery Trustees in accordance with the city's normal budgeting and appropriations procedures for the aims and purposes delineated as the city's responsibilities under 46.8, including the exception set forth in 46.8B3. So when you go to 46.8, what was it?
So it's not going to be included in here only because it's not something that's being changed. So we'd have to look at the code itself, which I can call up Hold on. Yep. So what was your question about that, Sue?
Oh, I guess, yeah, I just, what is that? What is that? What is 46.8B? I'm trying to see where that was again.
So that is that we can expend public funds to repair grave markers and monuments by going through the process of letting the owner know that we're going to do that on their property.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, actually, so that actually, thanks for clarifying that. And that actually makes me think of another question, which was the, maybe you were going to get to that, but there's the next item C on page 20 is allowing the trustees to accept privately donated amounts.
Yep.
I think that's brand new. Is that correct?
Nope, that was in the last one.
Was that in the last one? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe because it was just underlined, I thought it was new. Okay.
No.
Okay. And then as far as the previous owners of all those lots and so forth, like, is that something that DPW carries out that work as far as going back to them and figuring out?
That's already, yeah, that's really nothing that's ever going to have to be worried about.
Okay.
So, but I mean, yeah, if somebody comes forward with a cemetery lot purchased prior to then yes, the research on that, it will be on Public Works.
Okay. All right, great. Do people want more time to sit on this, or Fran, you said you're good. Caitlin, do you have any questions?
I don't. I'm good to vote.
Okay. David, are you good to vote?
I'm good to vote.
All right. Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that we accept this, the maintenance, whatever policy.
So, yeah, it's actually on that page.
It's on page 14, if you can read that motion, David.
I can't find it. 14. Somebody else had better read it, please.
Okay, so the motion would be that the Board of Cemetery Trustee hereby recommends that the City Council, after a duly noticed public hearing, take action to adopt ordinance 2020-03 as presented. So I'm going to take a roll call vote on that. Fran?
Yes.
You need a second.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I second it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Fran?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
And myself, I will vote yes as well. So the motion passes 4-0.
Now, do we have to also do all the other changes at the same time? Didn't we already vote on all the other changes?
We did. You mean all
Yeah.
the fees and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. So all of this can go to City Council?
Yeah,
now?
it's as it's presented in this packet right here, Fran. Yep, whatever you're seeing for tonight for changes is what's going to get presented to the council.
Okay.
But the board, so last time we did this, Patrick and I sat before the board, but that won't be necessary for this time around.
Right, you won't have to do another presentation. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
When will this go before the council?
So I'm going to get it to them, probably start the process at their August 19th meeting, because I'm on vacation during the August 5th meeting.
Okay.
So it'll go on August 19th with the public hearing for the first meeting in September, which I don't have the date in front of me right now.
Okay.
Paula, this is Linda. Did I get a copy of the packet?
It's on the web.
So yeah, nothing was mailed out, Linda.
I didn't mail, Linda.
Okay, well, I didn't know if it electronically sent it to it. I can go out to the web to get that motion then.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Item D, intent and mission of board's bylaw. Item 5B, creating inventory of all cemetery plots, including photographs and condition assessments of all monuments. So the intent of this particular item is just to have a consensus from the board on what this actually means as far as what the inventory of cemetery plots means, and what actually needs to happen. So it's my understanding that from the bylaws that the creating an inventory of all the cemetery plots, including photographs, is that the intent is that every grave in Lebanon in our municipal cemeteries would be inventoried, photographed, and assessed. Excuse me. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay. So I'm going to probably bring Patrick into this conversation. The inventorying all the graves it will be quite an undertaking. I don't know how many graves there are. Patrick, I don't know. Do you have a number off the top of your head on how many individual graves there are in the city? So like
Thousands.
I mean, like more than 10, less than 20. I don't, more than 10,000, less than 20,000, something like that.
I don't have the number directly in front of me.
That's all right.
Though.
Yeah. So I mean, Fran did the school street inventory, and she doesn't know how long it took her because she didn't record any time. She just did it. So the suggestion is that we look at cemeteries on an annual basis, like take one cemetery, inventory that cemetery 1 year, inventory another cemetery the following year, because I think trying to inventory all the cemeteries in 1 year would be literally impossible. And there's also, I think in 2021, there is an asset management system that would be available that would allow us to electronically document the inventory. So, Patrick, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is that something that you can talk to? Patrick?
Pat, you're muted.
Oh, Pat, you're muted. Yep. There you go.
Yep, sorry. I can't work this darn mouse. So yeah, we are doing a beehive. We've talked about that a little bit in the past.
Can you, what is a beehive? And
Beehive is our asset management program. So last year, if you recall, we did documentation up in Glenwood Cemetery where a gentleman by the name of Robert Perry came in and he did that GPR, ground penetrating radar. This year in our budget, we had allotted $2,500 for him to finish the map up there. And in doing that, it made all of our records digital. So we can now put all of our cemetery lots and the information that we have as far as maps into the beehive, which is the program, where we can have it on a tablet and be able to actually go to the cemetery, have that map in front of us digitally, and select a lot, take a photograph of the monumentation that's there, whether it's a monument and 6 grass markers, and do a visual assessment. Is this monument leaning? Are these grass markers sunken? Have the graves sunken in here? What does the monument show for people that are buried here? And what does, in time, we're going to have to pull all of our trust fund cards, which is going to be time consuming. That's something that we probably have to do administratively or hire like an intern to do, but get all that stuff digital so that we can pull that up on the beehive and say, okay, now we're in the field. We're in Glenwood Cemetery, Section A, Lot 131, Grave 3. This is the monument that was here. It was documented in 2021, and the monument was upright. It was not broken. It was not leaning, but now we're in 2025. It is leaning. We predict that this is going to need future maintenance as far as repairs of new foundation or leveling of the foundation or leveling of the stone, whatever the case may be. So I think the goal is to continue to get these maps digital, and that's something Jim and I have talked about for the future. For like next year's budget, we allotted for it in 2020. We completed that with Glenwood's map. Maybe trying to get West Lebanon Cemetery onto that because we do have available space, and for future growth, get all that stuff digital, and maybe start in West Lebanon or Valley Cemetery in Sacred Heart. Those maps are the easiest to read because I think it's not to put you guys down. It's going to be difficult for you to understand the way that they are because some of them are so old. But those ones are the most logical for you to look at and be able to pull pins, to take photographs and to do assessments, things like that. It's not something that you're going to, like you said, Sue, you can't do it all in 1 year. If we picked the cemetery a year and did it and did that on a rotation, we'd probably be in pretty good shape. But it's a matter of us finding that complete assessment of that we're going to do. And I think maybe a suggestion would be that I take Fran's analysis that she did. Fran, do you remember how many years ago you did that?
I think I did it like a couple of years ago.
Right. So
Yeah,
things
it was
have
like 2.
So things have probably changed since then. Some of the ones that maybe she had documented that are leaning are probably on the ground or broken, or maybe they're leaning a little bit worse and in danger of falling and breaking. So maybe it's something that I can spend some time on this fall, to kind of redo that. I have access to the Beehive program now. That's what we're doing all of our work management through, to try and find, the proper way or the most logical way for us to do that, and then roll that out in 2021 for you guys to be able to assist with. It's not really feasible. I mean, it's super time consuming. It's not feasible for us to be able to do it. And I think it's something that was made as a suggestion to the council from the task force that you guys help with that documentation. I'm happy to be able to work with you guys to, spend a couple days with you guys individually when that starts to happen, so that we make sure that we're all on the same page and we're doing it properly. And if you need help during that process, again, I'm happy to spend some time with you and do that. But it would certainly be a benefit to us in the future to be able to track what we're doing and how the grounds are being maintained. It's kind of like a fact check for us as staff, as well as how we're taking care of the monuments, the graves, whether things are settling, whether the turf's getting better, whether the monuments are staying level, things like that.
So
I noticed.
Go ahead, Fran.
I noticed that when I was documenting the West Lebanon Cemetery, the say number 1, A and B. B and A are reversed on the map. And I mentioned it to, who was the previous sexton? Johnson?
Yeah, Harold.
I mentioned it to him and he just said, oh, well, it's been like that for years. So we're just going to have to keep in mind that all of those are in reverse.
Yeah, and we've run across that. I mean, we just had one in West Lebanon. So when you read our maps, and that, again, that's part of the training process. When you read our maps, we read with our back to the road every single time. So if we're up in Glenwood, our back is to Dulac Street. If we're in Valley or Sacred Heart, our back is to Mechanic Street. If we're in West Lebanon, our back is to Mac Ave. And we always read left to right, like we're reading a book. If you're standing in the cemetery, though, and you're looking at a section, and I'm going to use section B, Fran, as an example, you wouldn't typically go to the wood line and read that map. You would stand on the road that you came in on and read that map, which would reverse it. So we had an issue with a lot in section B, where it showed people that were buried in, they had a lot of 1 through 6. They were buried in 1 and 2, but it actually ended up being 5 and 6. and they wanted to redeed 5 and wanted to redeed 1 and 2, but they couldn't redeed it. So we had to go through, we sounded it out by hand with hand sounding rods to determine. Thankfully, we had the vaults there to be able to hit that and know that we actually had a burial there. And then determine, okay, the only logical way that this was done is that somebody read it in reverse. We confirmed it by going to the next one that had a burial within the same time frame and did the same thing. So we were able to confirm that, okay, when they were reading this map, it was backwards, sounding the rest of the lot out, being able to determine that nobody else was actually in there. So, I mean, there are little quirks like that, but that's part of the training process that you guys are going to have to go through to make sure that you are actually accurately reading those maps and doing it properly.
So you can't just go up to the grave like you're reading a book from left to right.
As long as your back is to the road, you would be fine. If you drive into the cemetery and you just walk off of the road, Glen would be another example. And you come to the top of the hill at Glenwood and you turn left towards the Bernardi ball, you're going to read it backwards. If you're looking at the map and looking at that grave, you have to have your back to the wood line or to the road at all times.
Okay.
Patrick, I have a question. So, so is Beehive, is that the name of the asset management system that's used by the city, or is that just a portion of it that's used for cemetery?
Beehive is used citywide.
So that's the citywide name. Okay. And so there's a module within Beehive to be able to track the cemetery data, or we can build one. Okay. Right. Does that sound right?
Well, the city has built the module. So I have a work order program. I can take that program. Beehive is the program. I can take that program and I can send a work order to one of our full-time or seasonal employees. They get that work order and they can now act on it. Then they can determine how much time they spent on it, what they've used for material on it. If it's a grave, I can say, like, tomorrow we have a grave burial in Valley Cemetery. I can tell them that tomorrow we have a burial, Valley Cemetery, Section A, Lot 8, Grave 2. I've marked it out. I've pinned it. There's a grade stake there where the grave is to be dug. They can now track their time. It's assigned to them. They open it up. Okay, we have a burial at 10 o'clock. They go to that location. They dig it. They track the amount of time. They track the materials that they've used. Have they used topsoil? Have they used seed? Yada, yada, yada. Same thing for you guys. When we get those maps digitally uploaded, you'll be able to load that map up, select that lot, take photographs, do assessments, and assign it directly to that lot. That lot now becomes what we call an asset. So that's an asset of the city. The building is an asset. Everything becomes an asset that we can now track through that Beehive program.
So when you talk about the fact that Glenwood is digitized, that does not mean that it is in a database that can be searchable right now.
That's correct.
It can be uploaded to, right now it's not on the Beehive. It can be uploaded to the Beehive so that we can use that digitally.
It could be, but you're not doing that right now. That's just kind of not, that's not really what you're focused on right now. Would that be correct? Okay.
It's not to that level. It's not down to the lot level. Glenwood is on our asset management. All of our cemeteries are in our asset management. So we're tracking the maintenance that we're doing in those locations.
I understand. Yep.
But we're not tracking it down to the individual grave level yet.
Got it. Okay. So there would be a lot of work to do. I mean, I think you just mentioned this, and looking at what Fran collected is the type of data, but I mean, the type of data that you would want would need to be collected for the inventory, we'd have to kind of vet that, right? We'd have to figure out what's the data that needs to be collected. So that those types of questions haven't really been addressed yet. Would you say is that about right? Or
I think we need to at DPW take a stronger look at how closely we want to track it. Do we want to track? I think we need to be tracking the monument level. Are they leaning? Are they tipping? Are the graves sinking? what's the condition of turf, things like that. And that's why my suggestion is that maybe I take Fran's assessment and try and, or even a section of Glenwood that's now digitalized, add that to Beehive and say, take section A of Glen. I mean, Glenwood's a pretty big cemetery, and go through and document every level of that and see how that goes, and create some type of form that makes it a little bit so Beehive has been something that we've kind of created for every department. Like our cemetery department, we started the whole program in our cemetery department, and now it's gone to water, sewer, so we can track all of our stormwater drains, all of our water shutoffs, things like that. So as those have been rolled out, we found that, okay, we started out by saying we want X, Y, and Z in these drop downs for it. So maybe me doing it as the test run will kind of help weed out the things that we need, or we need down and drop downs, to make it a little bit more user friendly for you guys as you're doing it.
Right. David, do you have a comment?
Sorry about that. I was
That's
muted.
okay.
I was wondering whether we can begin to do any of that, or should we wait to do until that Beehive gets going on, like Glenwood Cemetery?
So, I mean, I've spent some time of, doing software development. And so, I mean, I definitely want to get Patrick's input on this, but.
Well, that's what I'm asking you and Patrick.
Yeah, I think that, my take is that until we know what data we want to collect,
Okay.
that it might not be a good use of your time, because I would hate, I'd hate for you to go out, or Fran to go out and, start collecting this data. And then you're like, oh, by the way, we also wanted this. And now you've already gone through 75 graves, and now you have to go back. So part of me, and in the software world, we'd say like, okay, let's figure out the data we want to collect, what's important.
Sure.
Let's take a look. Let's take a small section of a cemetery, collect that data, do tests on it and so forth, figure out if that's what we really need. I mean, I think that's one way to approach it. But Patrick, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I think if it's all right with you guys, let me kind of play around with the Beehive program, and maybe after thinking it through a little bit verbally with you guys tonight, let me see if we can get Glenwood digitally uploaded to Beehive and take a section of it, or even take Mount Calvary up in Glenwood, because that's a smaller section, document all of that, see how it goes, see how user friendly it becomes, and see what we need to tweak to make it usable for everybody.
Right. And because I think the other thing, David, is that, it's who's going to be using this data, right? So these are all the questions. Like there should be some sort of, I'm sure there'll be some sort of plan in place, but, is the intent that this information is just going to be used by the city? Is this intent that it's going to be used by the public? And I think that is where we would want to go. So I think that's going to determine what type of data is collected and how that data is collected as well. So, yeah, so I mean, it's a big undertaking, a lot
of the data that we're doing, the asset management collection of it, is to be able to determine how much maintenance we're putting into certain things and how much time we're doing it, doing so, and how much material we're using doing it. So, I mean, I think it's definitely beneficial for us to work on it, but it's finding the right path, like you said, Sue, to figure out the exact needs that the city needs, as far as data collection for maintenance, for budgeting purposes, as well as you guys to know what we need to be setting aside for future projects or improvements, things like that.
Yeah, and what the public gets to see, right? And like what's important for the public, because that the public would eventually probably have access to some of this data. So so I mean, it's a project. And it'll just need to be worked through. So that's a start. All right. Fran or David or Caitlin, do you have any other comments on that?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
And actually going out and documenting the graves, is this program something that like would be on a tablet and you'd be doing the pictures and everything all right into the program? Or is it something that you would have to document it in some kind of form and then upload the information after the fact?
So the answer is yes to your first portion of it. So we started off with Beehive using iPads, and we found that it's a little bit more user-friendly using Surface Pro. So we're transitioning to that right now. I just got mine yesterday, so I haven't quite figured out the program on it yet. But that's the goal for this week, is to get that more user-friendly. But yes, everything would be through a Surface Pro, so you'd be able to upload that lot, document everything on that lot through that program, take a photograph, add it to it. The program's it's a pretty good program. It's super user friendly. It's just a matter of learning it, which we're still doing and still kind of tweaking to the needs that we feel are necessary to track.
Right.
Right.
Right. So what the plan is there, Caitlin, and everyone else, is that there would be Surface Pros available at Public Works, and on a day that you were planning to go out and doing some inventorying, you'd stop by Public Works, you'd sign it out, and then you would go and do your thing, and then you would bring it back to Public Works and sign it back in. So the equipment would be provided to you, the training would be provided to you, and then you would be able to do your thing. That's correct, right, Patrick?
That is true.
All right, so we will, I'm sure we'll see some developments over this in the next year. All right. Any other questions on that? So moving on to item E, which is the annual process for inventorying cemeteries. So because we won't have access to something like the Beehive program for a year or so, we still need to be inventorying the cemeteries. And so part of the packet was, part of what you received in your packet was the inventory that we did last year in April. And so the thought is that until we do have a program like Beehive, we can still go to the cemeteries like we did last year and assess them on those categories like, landscaping, fencing, et cetera. If you want to note particular gravestones, you could, but the idea would just really to be giving an overall inventory and assessment of the cemeteries like we did in 2019. Any thoughts on that? Any comments? So I would say that I know that I have not looked at that inventory sheet from April of last year. And so I think it would probably be worth going through that with Patrick and checking off things that are no longer applicable. Fran, do you have a comment?
I don't think that what we did last year is complete enough.
Okay. What would you suggest?
Well, I think that we should try to do it a section at a time with what is going to be going into the program as far as the conditions of the monuments.
Right. And I think that, Fran, that's a valid point. It's just that we'd have to record that information again once that program's available. So,
but if you have it in a sheet, you already have that information.
Right. But you'd be walking through the cemetery and looking at every grave. So because you'd be taking a picture of the grave, and then you'd be giving a condition of the monumentation, of the site, et cetera. So I think that if you're trying to do that assessment in pencil. I just don't think it transfers to the database is what I'm trying to say.
It doesn't transfer, but you could put it in once it's ready. Wouldn't that save?
Well, I don't know what the new program looks like. So, but I'm envisioning something, and Patrick, you jump in if you need to, but I'm kind of envisioning something like you'd have this program and you'd stand in front of a grave, and there would be like a short questionnaire on the grave, like condition, I don't know, site number, do the cornerstones match up? And then you take a picture of it, and all that information would be uploaded into a database. So what I'm saying is I don't think that what you're writing down in pencil will transfer into the new database. I think it's a little too early to make that call, but that would be my guess.
So can I step in for just a second?
Sure. Yeah.
So what I would like to suggest, and Pat, you can weigh in on this, please, is that Pat look at the questions that are currently asked in what they've developed in Beehive and bring that to you at the next meeting to make sure that everybody is on the same page and in agreement with the fact that the Beehive or the information being put into Beehive meets the intent of what it is that you guys are supposed to be doing for inventorying. And then once that's all fleshed out and everybody knows that this is the information that needs to be collected, that is going to make its way into that asset management system, then you'll know better the information that you need to collect should you decide that you're going to go out and try to collect some information. You won't maybe have what you need for equipment. And so it would be, kind of like a double entry. And, but that I think would be more of an individual choice in how you want to spend your time.
So,
Pat?
so I agree, Paula. Right now, it's not broken down, like I said, to the lot level. So me spending a little bit more time with it. Erica's the one that's been helping us develop the whole Beehive program and asset management. So maybe in the next month, spending time with her and asking them to add additional windows to be able to break it down for lot assessment and grave assessment, and using Paula's suggestion to put that in front of you guys and maybe show you what we've been able to accomplish over the last month would help give you a better idea of how to document that to roll it out for 2021 versus, like you said, Sue, doing it handwritten, having entering it twice.
Right. And I think that, I just think we want to, you really want to think long-term, right? I mean, you want to think about I think this is the time you plan it. This is the time you think, what do I want the system to record? What information is going to be valuable to people down the road? And so I think that taking time to figure that out and not rushing into it is really important, because when we go out to inventory this, we don't want to have to go back and do it again. So we just want to make, we want to be really confident that the information we're collecting is valid. It'll be utilized, it's important and so forth. So, I'd be interested in seeing the data that Fran collected, and I think that would definitely be a part of the solution, but there might be other aspects that we need to look at as well. So
I think, Sue, to your point of doing it once though, I think it's something that we're going to have to continuously do, not every year in every individual cemetery, but if we got in a rotation where, if we have 8 cemeteries, every year we do one cemetery, we move to another cemetery, and in 8 years we come back to it. Then we have that data from 2021 in, say, Glenwood Cemetery. This is what has changed.
Right.
If Patrick Stone has settled or has moved, or the turf is better, or whatever the case may be, whatever the questions are going to be.
Right.
It's not something that we're going to do once, but it's something that we're going to have to continuously track. But this program gives us the tool to document it, to be able to go back digitally and look at it and say, this is what we've had for changes, and how do we adjust our maintenance schedule to accommodate for it.
Right. And certainly, right, there would be a rotation in the inventory and how that occurs. But it's like, it's just trying to get it right the first time, right? And that's also why we just want to start with one cemetery too, especially if we're using a new system.
Right.
So.
And also, this will be the base for long-term planning on both sides, right? So not sides, but both divisions of this, the Board of Cemetery Trustees and administration. So making sure that all of the information that we need to collect makes it into this system is going to be the way to go. And what I might suggest, and again, Pat, I'm throwing this back at you also, is if the mapping has been done up in Glenwood, then it seems to me that that would be the place that you would start. Because if that information is available in map form, and moving into 2021, another cemetery is going to be mapped, the Board of Cemetery Trustees can be doing the inventory up at Glenwood while whichever other cemetery is being mapped is done. And then once whatever that cemetery is in the next year, you guys would follow. So it would be like this constant moving from cemetery to cemetery based on which one is mapped. And that would be how you guys could plan.
I think, Paula, my only concern with Glenwood, like Glenwood and School Street, is even though it's remapped, it still has its quirks. Like, we had a call for what they called a special lot up in Glenwood, which we spent 2 days trying to locate because it's not actually on the map. It's something that somebody just randomly called on, and we had to physically go out, pull a trust fund deed, and thankfully in that deed it said, 15 feet left and 20 feet north is where you're going to find special lot A, where graves 1 through 8 will be. That's my only concern, is that when we put the trustees in an area like that they're not going to be able to delineate if that's lot 136 or is that special lot 101.
Right. So I would be
whereas,
relying.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yep.
So as like West Lebanon or Valley Sacred Heart, those are pinned. Glenwood's pinned, but it's pinned with steel pins and there aren't numbers there. West Lebanon and Valley and Sacred Heart, those are pinned with actual numbers so that if they get confused, we can actually locate a pin to make sure that we're actually in that very lot to determine that we're accurately getting that information.
Okay. Yeah. So however it is that whatever you feel is the best starting point, then I'm going to leave that completely up to you. You're the expert there. So, now
that Glenwood's documented, maybe instead of, like I said previously, maybe instead of using School Street as a starting point and working off of Franz, maybe I work off of Glenwood, and Jim and I talked about using budgeting money to do the same thing in West Lebanon, having Robert Perry over the wintertime do the remapping of that one, and then they start in that area just because it's going to be more accurate for them.
Right. So that work would be completed in the first quarter. Once snow leaves the ground, then everybody could hit the ground running with what needs to be done inventorying. That's what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, yeah, as long as you guys are all in agreement about a starting point, but Fran, for the next meeting, I am going to provide your inventory of School Street as part of the agenda packet. Because I think that, if nobody remembers it or hasn't seen it in a while, it's a really good thing for everybody to see, first of all, the work that you put in. Second of all, the level of detail that, we need to get down to. And maybe Patrick is going to have some suggestions of even more information that needs to get collected as part of this inventorying program. But I do want to include your inventory in next month's agenda packet.
Okay.
good. So in the meantime, though, we can continue with our annual inventories. I mean, Fran, if we don't, I think there's 5 areas of, that we assessed in last year's, 6 areas, no, 5, fencing, monuments, buildings, roads, sidewalks. I don't think that any changes have been made to signage. I'm wondering if some of these we don't even need to look at, right? So as far as signage, I don't think anything's changed in signage. I think there's been some improvements in the roads and the sidewalks. The monumentation, we're addressing that right now on School Street, but that's really the only place we're addressing fixing the monumentation. Is that a correct statement?
No, Valley Cemetery A, B, and C, we've started on flat stones.
Okay. So, so as far as monumentation, it's basically School Street and Valley where we're addressing some things. And then the fencing and landscaping, that's ongoing. I know we've definitely, there's been some fencing projects that have been completed and so forth. So why don't I think maybe, unless somebody else on the board has a suggestion, but maybe I could or Fran, maybe the 2 of us can work on this and winnow it down to see where we might need to focus an inventory for this year.
Okay. Sounds okay to me.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any comments on that?
So
Okay.
I think one of the things that you might want to do, that you could do, which I think was done as part of the inventorying, so to say, when the Public Facilities Committee was still working.
Yeah.
Is maybe just beef this up a little bit so that it can include more information. Like, it might be helpful right up front to have a snapshot of like how many graves are in the cemetery, like a little bit more detail about the cemetery itself.
Okay, sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
I think we can get a breakdown through Pontum, which is our cemetery software. That'll tell us how many graves are occupied, how many cremations, things like that.
I think there was a document that the board was provided with, I think late last year, and it was where there were lots still available. And so there were some numbers. I'm sure you're able to get it because the document provided numbers of the lots that had been sold or graves that were available and so forth. So.
Yeah, and we can have Anne's on vacation right now, but when she comes back, we can ask her to go through Pontum and do a breakdown of what's available, what's occupied, things like that.
The problem is the records are so spotty.
Yeah, the older stuff, that's true, Fran. The older stuff is spotty. I mean, I was in West Lebanon today marking out a grave for Thursday, and Fran happened to be over there visiting her sister's grave, and we were talking about 2 graves that aren't even on the map over there. And same thing with Glenwood. When we had Robert do the mapping up there, he came back and he said, I did the GPS of it and it looks like you're missing X, Y, and Z lots. And we went into that area 2 weeks ago and cleared out brush. And sure enough, there's monumentation in that tree line that's just been overgrown for years. So some of that stuff, and it's on the map, but it's not in the record. So there is some stuff that's spotty, but we're just gonna have to work around it. That's just part of having records back to the 1800s that we just don't have.
Right. So when you find that stuff out, Pat, do you then modify the record?
Yeah, Fran had talked apparently to like West Lebanon, for example. She had talked to the previous sexton years ago, and he had never added it, but I did add it.
Okay.
Same thing with Glenwood. I had commented back to Robert that, yes, you couldn't actually see those lots, but after doing some brush clearing, we were able to locate them. There's a couple that we can't locate. And we wonder, we make assumptions as to what happened, but there's no guarantee that that's what happened.
Okay.
Fran, I'm sorry, did you say something?
Yes, I find death certificates of people that are buried in a certain place, but they're not on the record anywhere. And also I find gravestones with names, but they're not entered anywhere in the records for Lebanon. And where it's really spotty for some reason is during the 1930s. And
So Fran, what have you done with that information?
that information, I have tried to work with Ann, but she won't add them to the database because she doesn't have a copy of the deed. And I know that there's 3 people buried in Valley Cemetery. And I know the woman that has the deed to that property. And I think I went through this with Patrick. And there are 3 people buried there, but they don't have a record of any of the 3 that are there.
It's tough for us to determine. It's tough for us to determine. I mean, we might show a record that person is, we might have a death certificate that shows that person passed away and was buried in Lebanon in that cemetery, but there's no guarantee that they're in that lot. So how do we definitively say that?
Right, but do you have like a running tally of these kind of issues for each individual cemetery? Are you documenting that somewhere, even if it's not in an individual plot or grave?
Yeah.
As Fran brings it up, we document it.
Okay, all right.
But you might come across like the lot that we were marking out for Thursday's burial. There's a marker there saying that Mr. So-and-so passed away. It's not on any of my records. So thankfully, a monument company wants to put a monument on that lot. Well, it's deeded. It's a 6 grave lot. It's deeded to an individual family. We now need to redeed those last graves 5 and 6, and there's a monument in a marker in grave 6 saying that Mr. So-and-so is there. Well, thankfully, the family's still around to say there's a marker there saying that he's there, but he's not actually there.
Yeah,
that's just a marker to memorialize his area. So how many of the ones that we find are actually there or not there?
Right,
That's
and
that's where that
I'm just
GPR
saying that if you know, right, and if you know that information, and at least it's somewhere that is accessible to you or somebody else in the future.
Yeah, we try and add it as it comes forward.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a conversation that we have to have with Ann a little bit more in depth. She just doesn't want to be adding, and I get Ann's point. She doesn't want to be adding stuff that she doesn't know. To say that somebody's actually there, maybe it needs to be reworded to her that, there's monumentation there saying that this person's here. Maybe we need to word it on the actual burial card saying that there's monumentation for this person here, but are they buried there, and leave a question mark.
Exactly. And there needs to be some kind of even if it's like, a miscellaneous card for that particular cemetery where these kind of notes are added, just to make sure that it's being tracked, because someday that question might be able to get answered.
It's easy with when we had Mr. Perry there doing the GPR survey. It's easy for us to be able to see where the ground's been disturbed, even for something that's been 200 years, using a device like that, because you can see the different levels of the earth as they've settled. So it might be something for us to look at in the future, to be able to kind of narrow those things down. But I think right now I think your suggestion is spot on, to just kind of document it for now and maybe look at trying to fact check those in the future to see if we have other disturbed areas to confirm whether that person's actually there or not.
Right, because if it's not documented that there's a question mark, then, it's just going to keep coming up, resurfacing. So, yeah, okay.
And the other thing too, Paula, we have records given to us through the Historical Society,
Yep.
and we have records kept by Sam Stevens. And that's how I was able to find a Civil War veteran that I knew was buried somewhere in School Street in a family plot. Well, I found the records that were kept and found where he's buried, and we were able to get a gravestone for him.
Yep.
So these records pop up sometimes from the old records.
Right. Yep. That's why it's important that, you know, we're documenting as much as we can, even if it's not on that particular or one particular grave, but in that particular cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, good.
All right. Here's my agenda. Oh, all right. So future agenda items, we talked about adding a rec path or a path from the Mascoma Greenway to the cemetery. That's just in a future agenda item. Other than that, that's it. Does anybody have any other comments they want to add before we adjourn? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second?
There's one more item on the agenda, I think.
Well, it was the annual inventory process, Fran.
The attachment to City Lebanon Board of the bylaws. You had something on there for the bylaws.
Oh, well, that was to right. That was included so that to clarify the intent of the meaning of that item in the bylaws. So we just provided the copy of the bylaw that states that particular section.
Okay.
Okay. Great. So is there a second?
Second.
All right, Fran seconds. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Fran?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So 4-0, the motion carries to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sue.
Have a
All
great
right.
evening.
You as well.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good night. Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.